Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take Away the Economy from Those Who Rigged It, As I See It, Class Warfare, The Only Resort to Right-Wing Doom, It's Worth It, How to Talk to Your Right-Wing Relatives, Friends, and Neighbors, and other books written by Egberto, Willies. Welcome to Politics Done Right. Speaker Johnson was interviewed by Jake Tapper about the one big beautiful bill. And of course, that one big beautiful bill, as they would have you believe, it's great for the economy. It's not going to blow the budget, as everybody knows it's going to blow the budget. It's not really going to transfer the wealth of middle-class Americans to the top. It's really just to get the waste and abuse out of the system. That is how they're characterizing this bill. Well, initially, when Jake Tapper started an interview, one would sort of believe that maybe he's going to really push the speaker to talk about what this bill is really going to do. So I want you to listen to this, and then we'll take it on the other side.
Debt. The number one threat to our nation right now is our debt. We take that very seriously. Congress has kicked the can down the road for decades, and we're out of road. And so we understand that it's our responsibility to fix this.
So there are 5 different independent scores of this legislation. Every one of them says that it will increase the deficit somewhere between $3.3 and $4 trillion over the next 10 years. Now, I get you take issue with the Congressional Budget Office and that they don't have dynamic scoring, all this. But this is the emerging consensus among everyone analyzing. They say not only are you kicking the can down the road, but you're making the problem worse. You're adding to the debt.
Well, I think that is dramatically overstated, and here's why. Those same groups can objectively see and acknowledge that this is the largest cut in spending in at least 30 years and arguably of all time. We're cutting over $1.5 trillion in federal spending while we check all the boxes and bring about a pro-growth economy. And the CBO has been panned because, as you said, they don't do dynamic scoring. What that means is they don't account for the growth that will be fostered by all the policies that are in this big piece of legislation. This is not theoretical, Jake. Just remember the last Trump administration. After the first 2 years, we brought about the greatest economy in the history of the world, not just the U.S. The growth was off the charts. It was an average of about 3% of growth in GDP. Why? Because we cut taxes and we cut regulations. We're doing the same thing this time around, but on steroids. This is a much larger package, a much more robust package with all these features that will really get the economy going, because wages will rise, job creators, entrepreneurs, risk takers will have more ability to expand their businesses. U.S. manufacturing onshore is being incentivized. All these things will work together to make the economy grow faster than many of these projections are putting forth. So we're not buying it. We'll see what happens, and we have the evidence to prove it from the past.
So the CBO doesn't get a vote, but my next guest, Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, does. And he wrote in the Wall Street Journal, quote, "The one big beautiful bill will almost certainly add to our deficits and debt." And he even called the bill the Titanic. What do you say to him?
My response to him, and we've spoken about this over recent months, is that we're doing the best we can with the vote numbers that we have. In other words, we've got to turn this aircraft carrier. You don't turn an aircraft carrier on a dime. It takes a mile of open ocean to do it. And it took us decades to get in this financial situation. We can't just flip a switch and get out of it overnight. One of the people that my friend Ron Johnson really respects is Russ Vought, who directs the Office of Management and Budget. And Russ is a big champion for this piece of legislation. He calls it historic, and he's a fiscal hawk, and so am I. So we're doing as much as we can. And I just encourage Ron to remember, in the House, we have 220 Republicans, a wide range of perspectives and a wide range of districts represented. And I've got to get to 217 votes to get this thing over the line. So as much as we can in as big increment as we can, I think we've achieved that here. And I just want them to remember that we got to deal within the realm of what's possible.
Now, I want to remind everybody who Russ Vought is. Russ Vought is one of the major authors of Project 2025. And Jake Tapper simply ignored that comment that he made. When they talk about the growth that comes with tax cuts, let's first remember something very important. Jake Tapper gave him a bone when he said, "I know you don't listen to the CBO, but what you do is because the CBO don't take into account what's called dynamic scoring." Dynamic scoring is when they take a look at what the economic effects of any legislation have on the economy? Well, they always claim that tax cuts create an effect on the economy, which is positive to grow the economy. The thing about it is we have a whole lot of proof that that's not true. We have Ronald Reagan versus Bill Clinton. Under the Ronald Reagan economy, there were a lot of jobs created after a big recovery. Under Bill Clinton, it multiplied many more jobs than Reagan created. That isn't spoken about because, again, the right wing has a better PR department, and the mainstream media doesn't spend a whole lot of time refuting or telling the truth. When we look at Donald Trump's economy proper, says data show Trump didn't build a great economy. He inherited it from whom again? Obama. And if you want to look at the numbers, we can look at them simply. As far as GDP growth, Obama was coming out of a huge downturn in the economy, which took several years to recover. And even with that, in his second term, he had comparable growth rates to Donald Trump. 2.4 for Obama, 2.5 for Donald Trump. But here's the kicker. Under Obama, more jobs were created, 215 per month under Obama versus 182 per month under Donald Trump. And these numbers are pre the pandemic. So you cannot use a pandemic as an excuse. Okay. So when we take a look at what actually occurred, if you look at the Dow Jones, of course, Obama had the crash to contend with and come back. Again, comparable numbers up. Change in unemployment rate. Look at the trajectory of the charts. He's just a continuation of the Obama economy. So when they talk about Donald Trump having a great economy, it has just been the continuation of what has occurred. But when it comes to debt, Donald Trump added a hell of a lot of debt for that economy. In other words, his tax cuts created a whole lot of debt. And let me explain a little thing about debt. Debt creates great immediate economies. All right. If I have $10, if the government if I get a $10 tax cut, that's $10 I have that I can spend. And if the government still has to pay that $10 that it pays for healthcare or pay for SNAP or whatever, that $10 still gets paid. So therefore, if I give a $10 tax cut and the government still has to spend the same amount of money, and you have to borrow that money to spend it, that doubles the amount of economic activity. So it is true that spending creates a lot of good within the economy, and tax cuts can actually create more spending in the economy if that tax cut doesn't come with spending cuts. And that's what Reagan used. That's what Trump used to increase his economy, while fiscally responsible Clinton, fiscally responsible Obama, fiscally responsible Biden, they played with both of these numbers to ensure that we just don't go completely out of whack. All these things are in the numbers. The fiscally irresponsible folks are Republicans and what they're doing. Now, how does this match with the big, beautiful bill? First of all, when we look at that dynamic scoring, disregard the dynamic scoring. The economy under the first term of Donald Trump proved that dynamic scoring for tax cut is a hoax. In fact, when you talk about tax cuts versus spending, there's something called the multiplier effect. In other words, if I spend more money, how many times does that dollar circulate in the economy to increase the GDP, the gross domestic product? If I give a tax cut, how much times does that money circulate in the economy to give a tax cut? To create economic activity. The reality, folks, is that spending for things like education, spending for things like healthcare, spending for all these other things are much more multiplicative than tax cuts. And especially because tax cuts go to whom? Wealthier people. Even if everybody got a 2% tax cut, given that our wealth is so skewed towards the top, a 2% tax cut for somebody making $10,000 is only about $200. But a 2% tax cut for somebody making $2 million is over $200,000 in tax cuts, right? So, over $400 million in tax. So let's understand how the system works all together and how this skewing to the the top works. Jake Tapper did very little. In fact, he allowed the Speaker of the House, Johnson, to come on your air and lie to you as far as most of these tax cuts or the tax cuts that they're doing are somehow just going to be reflected onto those people who didn't deserve to have SNAP, those people who didn't deserve to have Medicaid. Though he spoke about able-bodied people working. Well, what happens if you're that able-bodied person taking care of somebody in hospice? What happens if you're an able-bodied person with 3 kids that you can't afford the care for those kids? There are reasons why these laws aren't written to say, well, if you can work, you get no care because you can work and there's a job available for you. If there's a job available for you, but you can't take care of your kids if you have that job, is there a job really available for you? If we had a society like many of the Scandinavian countries that really believe in family values, that really believe that if you are working, you deserve the support to have your kids taken care of if you can't be with them. If you had a humane system that says you deserve health care, whether you make $1,000 or $1 million, then it would make sense. Now, what Jake Tapper did is he allowed Johnson to come on air and spin several lies. One, that the cuts that they're making to Medicaid, that the cuts they're making to SNAP, that the cuts they're making to Meals on Wheels are those cuts that are for people that are undeserving of said aid. That's a lie. When he goes out there and he talks about dynamic scoring for this bill, that's a lie. When he goes out there and talks about the great economy that Donald Trump had, that's a lie. And when he goes ahead and talk about the deficit not being blown out of proportion by this bill, that's a lie. And what Jake Tapper did is he gave him a platform to plant those seeds. And in planting those seeds, there are many who won't see what we're talking about right now that would have taken Mike Johnson's word to satisfy themselves, to make themselves believe that it is okay not to pressure those politicians who are likely to pass this bill. Well, over this weekend, I wrote a piece because I wanted folks to see the urgency in what we're talking about. And I want to go through that article that I wrote. Actually, I wrote it about midnight midnight. Actually, I wrote it about 1:00, just before. It was the last article I wrote before going to bed, because I am completely concerned that enough people don't really see the dire straits that we're currently in. And I'm not telling people to be fearful. I'm not telling people to be panicked. I'm telling people to engage. I'm telling people to act. And if you take a look at the article I wrote earlier this morning was, America, this is a 5-alarm fire, and we are at DEFCON 5. It is not business as usual. We are in a place we have never been before. At one time, I equated the political fraud we are living through today as just another dose of McCarthyism that, while harmful, would pass one we could easily recover from. But I'm wrong about that. This isn't the past McCarthyism. This is a lot more dangerous. It is not. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court, the Republican Congress, neoliberal Democrats, and the mainstream media have yet to understand the danger. Now, all of these people, let me give you the article and I'll put the article in the chat. It's on Substack as well. Many of these people, what's occurring with Donald Trump right now will affect them dearly. As I'm saying now, every one of these different branches of government is in danger from an authoritarian executive, and it is almost like they cannot see it. The Supreme Court and Republican Congress, for the most part, acquiesce to the corrupt Trump and his administration. And the neoliberal Democrats just blow hot air or follow the let Trump self-destruct advice from an age consultant. What is his name? James Carville. Do nothing. They'll self-destruct. No, they won't. Look at how Tapper handled the speaker with kid gloves. Okay, so no, James Carville have never won the majority of the popular vote. He has never run a majority. Every time Clinton won, he won with under 50%. But that is who many of these neoliberal Democrats decide they are going to follow. You know, I mean, if you want to know somebody who has the pulse of the people, look at the Democrat they make the most caricatured, and that is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You may smile, you may laugh, you may think she's too young, all of that, but she has the pulse of the working class. If that's why they have to ridicule her the way they do. But continuing, we are at DEFCON 5. In nuclear terms and in terms of fire, we are at a 5-alarm fire. A dangerous fire can simmer for a long time until a catalyst comes to fruition. So you have a home and all the windows are closed, all the doors are closed, and there's a simmering fire. The extra carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and compression within that room keeps it subdued. It's just kind of simmering. As soon as that fireman comes in, or fire person comes in, opens that door, an influx of oxygen comes in, ignites all those flammables, and explodes. That is what that bill is. That represents that one big, beautiful bill. It is that simmering fire, just waiting to explode. Waiting to explode is when it is passed by both the Senate and the House. You have to determine if you're going to keep that door shut, which is what we are aiming to do. Keep that door shut so that thing can explode. And why do I just say keep that door shut instead of trying to extinguish the fire? Because a Republican Congress, a Republican Supreme Court, and a Republican president, that's all those of us with sense have the power to do. Prevent the explosion. We're still going to get the bad policies from these guys continuously. We will continue to get these bad policies. So all we have to do is work hard to prevent this bill from doing what's called a backdraft. The Republican one beautiful bill is that simmering thing, and we got to hold it. But here's the deal. Let me point out the dangers of the bill, and this is what I wrote about it. That's all important, folks. Trump's average tariffs are higher than under the Depression-era Smoot-Hawley Act. That's the act that made the Depression even worse. Every American pays that tariff to the U.S. Treasury, which ultimately ends up in the pockets of mostly wealthy Americans. This means the working class has less money and buys fewer products. Given the broad base of the tariffs, this guarantees stagflation with a minimum inflation and recession. This has worldwide implications. First, every country's economy will suffer in the short run. They will reduce their dependence and allegiance to the United States as they recover. That will further erode the employment and buying power of the working class. Second, the big, beautiful bill is written in a deceptively evil manner. And I want you guys to listen to these 5 points of this big, beautiful bill. It is looking at it from 30,000 feet. You have to see it from 30,000 feet. Then you have to see what it's really all about. The insidious, evil manner in which it is done, the way it cuts Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, and all these things. The insidious, evil manner in which it's done shows the conniving extremes Republican would go to fool their MAGA base into supporting it. For example, as opposed to cutting Pell Grants, they make it virtually inaccessible by requiring that a student take 15 hours instead of 12 hours, almost guaranteeing that working students and part-timers need not apply. So you're a part-time student, or you can work full-time or part-time with 12 hours. Forget it. You can't get the Pell Grant because they limit the amount of, they say, well, if you can't go 15 hours, forget it. You can't get the Pell Grant. So that's a way they cut the Pell Grants without telling you it's a cut. They just make it inaccessible. Number two, most people at the low end do not benefit from the tax on tips. They advertise it. Tax and tips, and no tax on overtime. And everybody say, yay, yay, yay. But guess who are the people who can take care of that? The ones who can actually take advantage of that are the higher earning working class, the higher earning middle class, the people that will do fine whether the tax cuts come or not. They will be fine. And those are the ones who can take over or take advantage on no tax on tips or no tax on overtime. You know why? The poor people still are left behind. The poor working class is still left behind because their standard deduction that they were able to take last year, the year before, and always continue to stay the same. And here's the worst. When we look at the top 10% and the bottom 10%, the bottom 10% are not getting a tax cut. They're actually getting a tax increase. They don't tell you that because they bungle it up with the bottom 20%, right? So the bottom 20% got to get a little equally. The lies, the big tapper, all of this that I'm talking about in my little piece here. The time for America to know how this bill would affect them should have come from this independent progressive media person. This should be coming from Jake Tapper. These are the guys that have a full staff to investigate all this stuff. They have a staff that could come out and inform Americans about what the bill actually does. Jake Tapper had him on for 15 minutes. Jake Tapper could not get not one of these questions, important questions, material questions that will affect all of the working class. He didn't get not one of those questions out. Not one. 3, work requirements sound good to receive Medicaid until one realizes that one cannot afford a babysitter or outside care for a loved one, or if you can't get 80 hours in a month, which some people, again, they may live in rural America, not a lot of jobs. So somebody may have a little shop that they want some work in, another little store, a little mechanic shop, and they may ask you to come and work for a few hours that doesn't add up to 80 hours in a month. But you're working, you're doing something productive, but you're not working 80 hours. Cut your Medicaid. These are cuts that they don't have to say it cuts. They just say able-bodied workers. Well, you have to be able to do these things. The reason the bills are not generally written that way is to prevent that guy in Timbuktu, Missouri, who is working. He wants to take care of his family. But this month, he fell below 80 hours. He loses his Medicaid. And then another month he works 80 hours, he gets a chance to reapply again, wait through all the paperwork to get health care again. Evil. All of this will make people die. But the Democrats, liberal Democrats, they're not speaking that way. They're not saying if this bill passes, a lot of people would have been murdered by those who passed this bill. You have to speak in graphic manner. Democrats have to go into rural America, go in front of that hospital and say, if this bill passes, this hospital closes. Where are Democrats doing that? Why aren't every Democrat that has a website, why aren't they saying, put in a video up? Everybody wants videos. They're doing TikToks. They're doing Instagram, all these things. All of what you're seeing here, I also place on Instagram, TikTok, and all over to spread the message. But we need a lot of people doing this, right? We need everybody doing this, right? So we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is an expert in getting her message out. Guess what's special about Alexandria? The people who voted for her? Guess who also voted for her? There are people who voted for her that were MAGA. They voted for her and Trump at the same time. How does that compute? How does that? And you know what she did? She didn't say, I didn't want those votes. She went and interrogated those people who voted for her and then voted for Trump. She knows how to speak to the working class. The other item, most of the green policies Biden passed went to where again? Red states. I repeat, most of the green energy and green job policies went to whom? It went to red states. I could see that as a strategic move by Biden, right? Biden probably said, well, if I make sure that a lot of red states get all these jobs, what does that really mean? That likely means that it stands a better chance of not being cut. When I speak about the evil, about the big, beautiful bill, that's what I'm talking about. These guys don't give a damn about MAGA. These guys don't give a damn about the working class. They don't care about any of that. They want those tax cut benefits at all cost. They want it at all costs. It does not matter who it harms. And that is the message that we have to get to those people. Neoliberal Democrats are the Democrats that are funded almost exclusively by the corporatocracy. These are the guys that prevent policies that really supports working class people. These are guys like, what's her name? Sinema, who prevented health care and daycare for your kids. These are people like Joe Manchin, who prevented people from getting. Let's be clear here. Joe Manchin, a neoliberal Democrat, he is from West Virginia. And Joe Manchin said the following: he does not want to give people, give the working class tax breaks, give the working class health care, give the working class support for children care, etc., because he said they will drink it off. This is Joe Manchin, a Democrat out of West Virginia, either the first or second poorest state in this nation. And he is the one who helped, along with Sinema, build back better, which had a whole lot of progressive things that we wanted. Biden, a president that I wasn't initially for. Anybody who knows me know that I was a Bernie Sanders delegate. But better than any past Democratic president since Johnson or Roosevelt, he listened to the progressive caucus, and he was in fact passing Democratic, or rather progressive caucus policies. Not as deep as we would like to, but better than even Obama. And that's what we're talking about here, folks. That's what we're talking about. So we have to get our act together. Last one. Medicaid cuts will ultimately cause many rural hospitals to close, as many patients cannot pay without it. And this is where, Catherine, I speak about Democrats should be out in every rural area right now. We need to get out of Washington. We need to get out of these places where people are already going to vote for us because they know we're on the good side. We need to go. It doesn't matter if people are going to scream at us. It doesn't matter if people are going to say, get out of here. I live in one of the reddest areas in this county. Okay. And it turns out that I go out there and I speak, I convince, I talk to my MAGA brothers and sisters. I talk, I inject, I do all of this. And yes, you don't change most of them, but you change enough of them to put the fear of passing a bill like this in them. But if we really wanted to get things done, again, what Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders were doing, going around red areas and getting big crowds, let me tell you, more than 10% of those crowds that Bernie and Ocasio-Cortez got, those were what again? Republicans. They were Republicans. So it is so important. So Bernie is your guy. Great. I think there are a lot of Dems out and about. Yeah, take a look at what Bernie and Ocasio-Cortez have been doing and getting people out there en masse. And yes, your Catherine, Rachel Maddow does a great job of showing all those different protests that are going around. And by the way, I'm with the Indivisible Kingwood here, where we do a whole lot of that, etc. So yes, you're absolutely right. A lot of people are out there, but we need more to go out there. Not only, again, like I said, when I talk about the neoliberal Democrats not doing their job, my dear, what should be done right now is going into all these areas that Republicans dominate, as Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie did, and stand in front of that hospital. We know what hospitals are closing. I presented an article a couple of weeks ago with the CEO of a hospital in rural Colorado that votes Republican, where he came on national TV and said, if this bill passed, my hospital closes. Now think about a delegation of Democrats going in front of that hospital and having and mounting a press conference and saying, if this bill passed, this is how much this hospital will get cut because of the amount of people who will get cut here, and this hospital will close. And you do that with hospitals. You go to daycare centers. You go in front of that daycare center. You don't need permission. You can get on the public sidewalk, and you say, the X amount percentage of these people who are going to this particular daycare center are on assistance. If this bill passes, they will no longer be. You have to do the work. You have to go out there and earn people's vote. One of the reasons we didn't earn people's vote is we thought we could just throw a whole bunch of stuff on TV. We spent $2 billion, or $2 billion to lose an election. Donald Trump spent $1 billion to win an election. And you know what was the difference? In how it was spent. They invested in their bloggers. They invested in their independent media. They invested in their lying media. They invested in the grassroots. They invested in all these things that touched the people the closest. They did it. They went out there. They blew up, even though they're lying and they're evil. They threw up a trans person, and they made that the definition of what democratic policy is. We support trans. We support everybody. But they made it seems like at your expense, they're supporting all these whatevers. We have to get smart, and we have to do the job. But the problem is when too many of you are on the take, or I should say too many of us are on the take, right? We can't go out and say, this corporation has been pilfering us, because you're getting a few dollars from these corporations. So when you're like Ocasio-Cortez, she's the highest grossing fundraiser in the aggregate, and she doesn't do it with corporate dollars. I am saying, if we work with the people that are supporting us, we don't have to have those corporate dollars. If you are supporting your independent media, if you're supporting all these different groups, we don't need to have the corporate media that's running this stuff. Look, it's in our hands, and we have to engage. I could go on and on, but you get the picture. Many will see some poetic justice in that this bill will be a disaster for MAGA's socioeconomic well-being. The problem is that their suffering will be a metastasizing cancer that spreads to all. So we don't get to suffer. MAGA doesn't get to suffer from what Trump's going to do to them in a vacuum. That spreads to all of us. And that is something that needs to be mitigated. The Supreme Court has given Trump a permission slip to act illegally. The Republican Congress allows itself to be puppeteered by the president with little pushback, and neoliberal Democrats have made themselves irrelevant. How do you make yourself relevant? Go to those hospitals that are going to be closing and have press conference and bring people over. You're going to have a lot of MAGA come out and scream at you. That will make the press conference get even more visibility. We have to use our heads. We have to be out there. We just don't need to be out in front. Yes, we have to be out in front of that senator's office as well. We must visit our senators and congresspersons' office virtually, through phone calls, emails, with our persons, with our bodies, written letters, fax in person, and more. Let them know you are not fooled by the window dressing portion of their bill. Let them know you understand the evil within it and how it will be disastrous to the working place. In other words, we don't want to just go out there and scream. We don't want just go out there and say the bill is not good. We want to be able to tell them why the bill is not good. I enumerated 5 major things in this article, but there are scores more that are bad. But these are some major ones that I enumerated in this article. Most of the articles I'm writing and distributing through Substack, Medium, Daily Kos, and other networks expresses the urgency. Most video shorts on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Telegram, Twitch, and other platforms are flooded. I'm flooding the zone with and trying to express this reality. My 2 politics shows, Politics Done Right daily in the mornings at 6 a.m. Central and at 3 p.m. Central, are deconstructing our current path to demise. Absent an intentional change by all of us, absent all of us engaging, making these people know that we are not just going to take it. That is what prevents this bill from passing. But you have to engage. You have to go out there. We're not scared. We're not frightened. We're not paralyzed by fear. We have to make our presence known. Those of you in a wheelchair sitting back or whatever, tell your story. In fact, I have a call and I'm going to ask this now and anybody else who pass this on to your friends and people. One of the best ways, and Michael Lewis points this out, this is the author of many docuseries, books, the works. A story is much better than me giving you a whole lot of stats online. If I can tell you a story about how something affects my humanity, how something affects me, it is much more powerful than me just throwing out numbers and facts and all that kind of stuff. If I can show you how it affects me. So what I've been doing and trying to do is get people's own stories. Tell it to me in 5 minutes. Tell it to me in 2 minutes. Tell it to me in 3 minutes. What I want to do going forward is if you know somebody with a story to tell, somebody that wants something that they know they're going to lose with this budget, or they know they're losing for some kind of care that should be there that isn't there, give them our info@politicsdoneright.com. Let them email us and let us do either a video interview with them, an audio interview, or just tell us their story so that we can further promote this story and let people know that many are suffering in silence. Most people in America suffer in silence. So we don't get a chance to understand much of what's happening, how people are affected. A lot of people are sitting down there thinking, I am the only one that's going through this. I'm ashamed for what I'm going through, which isn't the case. There's nothing to be ashamed of in this country that the people that are ripping you off are corporations. The people that should be ashamed are the billionaires who are making all their income off of your backs. Don't let anybody fool you. If you're working, if you're out there doing something, those billionaires are making a profit on your back. Nothing to be ashamed of. But we suffer in silence. And because we suffer in silence, these evil animals calling themselves politicians get a chance to push through these things that affect even more evil pain on you. We have to get over that. We have to get over that. So I'm asking you right now, folks, first of all, I hope a lot of what I am speaking about here, Margaret Ryan says, I joined rural outreach in the visible group going to red districts to help them discover why this bill will hurt their small city. Thank you, Margaret Ryan, for what you're doing there. Very important. Very important. Catherine says, stop the Senate approval of the NASTA bill. Please invite everyone to join the fight. That's the reason I'm here on a Sunday, a holiday weekend, and doing this. That's why I'm writing. That's why I'm doing this, Catherine, because right now we can do something about it. Right now we can do something about it. After the bill is passed, it would have harmed your brother, your sister, your neighbor, your auntie, your daughter, and a lot of it will be irreversible. You can't reverse death. You can't reverse the financial catastrophe that will affect many. Let's just give a good example here. This is a good example here. Many people thought they were going to retire, and this is so sad. Many people thought they were going to retire with their 401ks, good numbers. And in one day, Donald Trump knew what he was doing. He talks about throwing tariffs on everything. And their portfolio crashed. Their portfolio crashed. And it wasn't, you can't say, well, they should have balanced their portfolio from bonds to stocks, etc. Because what Trump did caused not only stocks to crash, he also caused bonds to crash. So you have your portfolio here. You're ready to retire in a year or so, and it dumps. Good people, a lot of people who voted for him, and it crashed. Their retirement crashed. Policies matter. The people we elect matter. The media that we have matter. All of this matters. And we have to be the ones, I remember when Obama was running, he used to say, we are who we've been waiting for. And I took that to heart. I took that to heart. Actually, I took that to heart during the run. I started doing all this, gave up my business for independent media. Don't know if kind of crazy to do, but for independent media, because that thing about who we've been waiting for. I knew all this. I'm an engineer. I knew all this technology stuff. I didn't need to hire anybody to do any of this kind of stuff. I could do it all on my own. I could connect the wires. I could figure things out, etc. I said, we've been waiting for. When I'm complaining about why is it this way? Why is it that way? And somebody should do something about it. I said, why not you? Right? And I am. And we are. And we should. And we should. And we should. And all of us can. Well, not all of us can. Those who have the wherewithal, if you're in a wheelchair, if you're ill or whatever, just do whatever you can. If you have a story to tell, don't forget, drop me a line at info@politicsdoneright.com. I'll tell your story. We'll get you on with your cell phone and have a little chat, that whole thing. Put it out there. Let's stop suffering in silence. Let's start working together. I'm going to be getting out of here shortly. Got to go write a few more blogs to put out there. Like I said, I got to get a few more blogs to put out there. Natalie Lago says, aren't Republicans in Congress dead set on passing this terrible bill? Not disappoint Donald Trump because they fear retaliation. Yeah, they are. But more than retaliation from Donald Trump, they fear retaliation from you. That's why Senator Johnson is so out talking about this bill right now as being a budget buster and all of that. Let's see how far he gets with that. But he'll get far if he thinks he has your support. That's how he'll get far. If he believes that he can get your support, that you're not gonna really get his butt, then we'll get the 3 senators that we need in the Senate to prevent the passage of this bill. We still have the time to do it, but you have got to engage. You can't sit back, like James Carville said, and just wait for things to happen. You have to be actively engaged. And while our media is doing a poor job, that's why myself and other independent progressive media folks are trying to do this. Donald Trump always says he's a king of debt. He loves debt. He doesn't mind screwing people over. He doesn't mind borrowing money, failing a business, not paying it back, and then going on to the other one. Again, there are some people in our economic system that they have the privilege that they can screw up over and over and again. It doesn't matter that they have no real backing. They get unlimited credit. They get abilities to fail. They can fail upward, as Donald Trump has failed upward right into the presidency. No time in our history did we have such a businessman that has had a completely failing record, one who has, many believe, gotten some of his funding, etc., from mob-like figures. Never in our history would we believe that would become our president. And then again, just look at a few days ago, or maybe last night, when he had a whole bunch of folks who bought his cryptocurrency, something based on nothing, just a high legal way to provide provide bribes to him. So I mean, this is who we have as a leader, and in the attempt to run our country like he run his fraudulent businesses, the outcome that we're looking at is exactly as this economist is talking about. Will we become Argentina? Well, you know what? We are solidly on our way, because we have a Congress, we have a Senate that is filled up with a bunch of boys, coward boys, unable to look at a paper tiger, stand up to him and said, you're not going to get it. But again, the MAGA people will eventually have to speak when they start to feel the pain. I want you to listen to this, and then we'll take it on the other side. The king of debt.
I call myself the king of debt. I'm the king of debt. I'm great with debt. Nobody knows debt better than me. I've made a fortune by using debt. And if things don't work out, I renegotiate the debt. I mean, that's a smart thing, not a stupid thing. And I made a fortune.
How do you renegotiate the debt?
Because you go back and you say, hey, guess what? The economy just crashed. I'm going to give you back half.
Oh, wow. Justin, quote, oh, the economy just crashed. I'm going to give you back half. I mean, you take your 4 events, whatever it's called, Liberation Day, threatening to fire Jerome Powell, which you quickly walk back because the economy threatened to crater. You have all these, we're almost there. Just talk a little bit more about the intersection of the country's debt and people's day-to-day lives.
Yeah, so I want to pick up where the president left off there. So private bankruptcy, which the president used liberally, is a terrific way to get rich by screwing other people. What you do is you take a bet. Heads, you win, you're rich, off you go. Tails, you just declare bankruptcy and you don't have to repay your debts. That works for people. It doesn't work for countries. And if you want to know who to ask Argentina, which 100 years ago was one of the richest countries in the world and has struggled to repay its debt on and off ever since. And as a result has had a dysfunctional government that's often been unable to borrow, and its economy has basically failed to prosper over an entire century. And that's not who we want to be. How does this touch? So one way it touches our lives is it could be the first step towards being Argentina. I really hope we're not. A more direct way is simply that if the government's paying interest, just like your family, if you're paying on your mortgage, there's less money left to buy other stuff, which means that we'll still be paying taxes. We just won't be getting much back for it. Nicole, I want to highlight one really important part of the current budget discussion. So you're talking right now about this very important issue, which is how much we spend versus we tax. That's the budget deficit. There's also a Robin Hood aspect. How much do we take from who and what do we give to who? This is the anti-Robin Hood. This is, according to one of my favorite budget wonks, Bobby Kogan, he said this is the largest redistribution from poor to rich in American history. So if you're okay with those at the bottom end of the income distribution getting by with less because you think it's important that those at the very top end get tax cuts and therefore have more resources to get by, that's fine by you. But for those of us with a heart, honestly, it breaks our hearts a little bit.
Well, and it should break everybody's heart. I mean, it'll break the economic vitality of this country. Our resilience after COVID wasn't because the rich kept getting richer. It was because the consumer kept somehow finding enough optimism to go out and buy things. I mean, Tim, where does this break the MAGA movement politically if it does?
Yeah, well, it would happen, I think, 6 months to a year from now. This is not short term because you're seeing the cracks in Congress right now. But it breaks apart this MAGA movement because this kind of uneasy coalition between your Wall Street Journal, country club Republican crowd that wants the tax cuts, that wants the SALT deduction. They want one element of this. You have your new populist MAGA types that don't want these cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, at least in red states. You have the remaining Tea Party budget hawk types that are trying to find the cuts to pay for these tax cuts, right? And so they're all infighting. And at the end of the day, to get it through, what they've come up with is this Frankenstein monster that jacks up the debt by $6 trillion, that still cuts money for SNAP and Medicaid, and that gives the tax cuts to the wealthy and to like these upper middle class, kind of country club Republican voters, particularly in big cities. And so they're doing that because they want to give a little bit to everybody. But when on the back end of that, when you end up with spiking interest rates for middle class folks, when you end up with working class people losing their SNAP benefits and healthcare, there's going to be big parts of the MAGA coalition that are mad. And I think that is, where this is heading, assuming they jam this thing through. But, it's going to take a little time for all that to filter through the economy.
So the king of debt doesn't mind putting in words that, well, if you borrow some money and the economy crash, I'll give you X on the dollar. Well, you can't borrow money if people believe there's a possibility they would only get a percentage of their dollar back on their principal. A country can't work like that because you know what? When people buy your bonds, they expect that the faith that they have in the United States that we've had for centuries would remain. And that's why we can have a paper dollar that is backed by nothing but the faith in the United States. That is why we can have a dollar. It's called fiat money. It's simply based on we will pay our bills back. Donald Trump is bringing all the cancers that he had within his own businesses to America. Now that he's bringing all the social ills, all the financial ills, all the mobbish techniques that he used in his own businesses. He is bringing that to the United States, and that doesn't bode well for who we are. And what that really means is that, look, this is not a lot of what's happening right now isn't happening in the open, but the countries around the world don't think that BRICS or some spin-off thereof is not being thought of right now to really start the replacement of a failed nation. because any nation governed by the likes of Donald Trump or the train that he'll leave behind him, anybody who supports Donald Trump, talking about leadership now, any one of them that intend to come in and follow the type of governance that Donald Trump represents, puts what was the American stand-in clear and present danger, and that's just where we are. This is going to take a generation to recover from if we can start a recovery. But until we start a recovery by becoming more informed, by becoming more intelligent, by becoming more of all these things so that we don't stand the risk of making the mistake we've made to elect scumbag is actually a nice word to represent him. It doesn't accurately describe him sufficiently negative as it should. But anytime we have to, or going forward, we have to prove that we as a country won't make this mistake again. We have to prove that we won't do it. Otherwise, it's all gone. When Congress writes a bill, it has consequences. And often those consequences aren't immediately known. The thing about it is the one big, beautiful bill that Donald Trump put out there, we know what the consequences are because you know what? It is quite evident and it is quite exposed. One of the consequences of this bill is that it's going to cut approximately 10 billion meals a year that normally goes to the poor folks who we have not made corporations paid them appropriately. So therefore, there are many people out there that are working, but still have to visit food banks. Why? Not because they're lazy, not because they don't want to work. They don't qualify for food stamps, so they have to go to food banks. But you know what? With the changes that they're talking about making to SNAP, the food stamp program, many of those people will have to use food banks going forward. And the food banks right now are receiving over 60% more visitors than they did 3 years ago. That just shows you the state that the country is in right now. The richest country in the world, the country that produces more food than it can use, it's a country that exports all the food. And the people in this country, a large plurality, are not making enough money to not keep them in a state of angst, and many having to either be on food stamps or going to food pantries. I want you to listen to this. I want you to listen to this leader of one of the big food distributors in Atlanta. Let him explain what we're going to go through, and then take a look at the map to see where this bill is going to affect people over the entire country and where most of that demand is going to be. Like I mentioned on my KPFT program this morning, there is a certain level of evil. There is a certain level of evil that you can have, that you have to write a bill where, in order to give tax breaks to a whole bunch of folks who make a lot of money that they don't deserve making because they've made it on these poor people that we're cutting. They're making their monies on these people's backs, but we are willing to cut more to pass that buck to the wealthy. There's a degree of evil, and we as Americans need to start seeing it the way it should be seen. What that budget is doing is evil. The writers are evil. You cannot be but evil to do what this bill is doing. I want you to listen to this, then we'll take it on the other side.
A new map from USA Today shows it could severely impact the poorest Americans. If that mega bill would pass, each highlighted state would have to pay at least $98 more a year for each person on food assistance to make up for the $267 billion that was slashed from the program. Food banks across the country are said to be terrified, saying it would create an unsolvable crisis as need skyrockets. In Atlanta, the community food bank says demand has jumped 60% in just the past 3 years. That's where we find my next guest, Kyle Wade, president and CEO of the Atlanta Community Food Bank, which serves more than 800,000 people across 29 counties in North Georgia. Kyle, first of all, thanks for being with us. What are you seeing right now in terms of food need?
Well, thanks for having me. And as you just said, demand for food assistance is as high as we've seen it in Metro Atlanta. That we know that the same is true for food banks all across the country. Lines are just getting longer and longer at food pantries. And as you mentioned, we're serving 60% more people today than we did just a few years ago. So demand is really high. And the last thing we need right now is to have a significant cut in programs that get resources to economically vulnerable families. That would put an extraordinary amount of additional pressure on food banks and other social programs that are serving those families.
Can you give us some specifics, for example? I mean, how would those cuts to SNAP, again, they now have to go to the Senate, but how could it impact your ability to serve? What would you do?
Well, in terms of the scale of what's being proposed, the net effect of the cuts that were included in the House bill would be the same as if we eliminated the entire food bank network in the country. That's the scope of what would be cut from assistance to families. We'd essentially eliminate all of the food bank activity that exists across the country.
I just want to make sure I understand you, because that's a shocking statement. Are you essentially saying if this goes through, every single food bank in America would have to double the amount of food, double the amount of people they serve potentially, just to meet the need to keep people from going hungry?
Yes, there are different estimates for what the bill would actually eliminate, but at least one estimate would suggest the equivalent of close to 10 billion meals a year in the amount of food that's provided to families. You know, it's $30 billion worth of food a year that's being proposed being cut from the SNAP program. And that's more than what food banks collectively distribute every single year. So we don't know if all of that demand would ultimately come to us, but we're talking about doubling or more our output to provide that same amount of food.
There are a number of people who, in arguing for this, believe that there's tons of waste, fraud, and abuse. They believe that there are people who could and should be working who are not. They give you a lot of reasons for why they think that these cuts are okay. You deal with this on a day-to-day basis. Is that your experience?
Well, it's certainly not our experience. The vast majority of people who receive support from food banks are families who are working. A lot of the increase in demand I referenced are among families who actually make too much money to even qualify for SNAP. And the folks who are on SNAP predominantly include families, households with children, senior households, disabled households. So the folks who can work are working in our experience. And if we were to remove a lot of those folks from the program through a variety of different proposed mechanisms in the bill, that would just result in more demand coming to food banks, a level of demand that is beyond what we really have the capacity to provide.
The only way you can see the pain that this bill is having and will inflict on people is to call it out, to make sure that people understand that it is in fact an evil bill, to call out those folks who like to call themselves religious and evangelicals, to ask them, what would Jesus do? What would Muhammad do? What would all these other folks do if they did find out that a rich country decided to make those who have in their practice abuse others find a legal way to transfer their wealth upward, to continue what I call legalized theft on those who are antiseptically enslaved. This is a shame. This is, in fact, a shame. Support for this show, Politics Done Right, comes from politicsdoneright.com, publishers of How to Make America Utopia, Take